So, isn't it true that the very best recommendations you get are from the people who know you the very best, right? Like if my best girlfriends send me a book to read, or Tim sends me a podcast, or whatever it is, like they know me well, and I know immediately that because we click in that way, whatever they send me is golden. So, if anyone in this room was present when we had John O'Leary speak at our conference a few years ago, John is a dear friend of mine and was maybe the best speaker we've ever had at this event. And I asked him many years, and I said, you go all over the world and you talk. If you could hire anyone to come, who would you hire? And without even a second's hesitation, he said, Tommy Spaulding. You need Tommy Spaulding. And fast forward a few years, and I'm thrilled that Tommy is here with us today to close out our conference. I've seen Tommy in action, not just on the stage, but I've seen him in his work, working with leaders of organizations, working with kids, and working with people all over the world to bring out the leaders inside of them, and that's what he's here to share with you today, and I cannot wait for you to hear him. He's been teaching heart-led leadership and the art of developing authentic and lasting relationships that build businesses and brand loyalty for more than 25 years. A world-renowned inspirational speaker on leadership, he talks to hundreds of corporations and associations, organizations all across the globe. He's the founder of the National Youth Leadership Academy and is the president of Tommy Spaulding Companies, an independent leadership development organization. He's a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today best-selling author, and he's here for us today. I won't waste a minute longer of our time. Please join me in welcoming Tommy Spaulding.
Meredith asked me my top 10 songs. I gave her the list. I thought I was going to get Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, but I love Journey as well. So good to see you, Meredith, and Bam, and Lauren Ward, and all the financial advisors here. Thank you for John for nominating me years ago, and this whole talk just really started with lunch with Meredith and Kelly 5 years ago at a Chevy's restaurant here in St. Louis, and finally great to be here. I get a chance to talk to organizations all over the world and meet other speakers. And that's one of my favorite things, because when you meet other speakers, you learn a lot. And there's coaches or CEOs or athletes. And one of my favorite speakers on the speaking circuit is a former coach of the Miami Dolphins. Anyone know who coached an undefeated season in the 70s, who that coach was? Don Shula. So Shula tells a story when he was the coach of the Miami Dolphins years ago. He couldn't go anywhere in Miami without people going up to him. Want his autograph, want to take his picture, want to talk about Sunday's football game. And Don Shula was kind of a quiet guy and a shy guy, and he really hated all the fanfare. So he convinced his wife that during the off season, they're going to rent this little log cabin in upstate New Hampshire, just to get away from all the fans in Miami. So his wife goes up there and rents this cabin upstate New Hampshire for the summer, and Shula joins her. And the first week they were there, Mr. and Mrs. Shula found this old-fashioned movie theater. You know those old-fashioned movie theaters in small-town USAs with the small popcorn machine and the person in the coat and tie taking tickets in the small little theater? So Shula buys his tickets, he buys his popcorn, and Mr. and Mrs. Shula walk in the movie theater. There was a handful of people in the theater, and as soon as they saw Don Shula walk in the movie theater, everyone started clapping, gave him a stand ovation, and Shula's head gets really big and says to his wife, I can't even go in the middle of New Hampshire without people recognizing me. His wife said, Don, calm down, watch the movie. And so they watched this movie. It was a very moving movie, very compelling movie. So when Shula was walking in that movie theater, he starts talking to some of the locals about how amazing this movie is. And he realizes when he's talking to these people that they have absolutely no idea who he is. So he's kind of dumbfounded. So he walks up to the older gentleman that he was sitting next to the movie theater and says, hey, sir, do you know who I am? And the old guy looked at Shula and says, no, sir, I have absolutely no idea who you are. And Shula says, well, why'd you give my wife and I a stand ovation when we walked to the movie theater? And the old guy looked at Shula and says, you must not be from around here, are you, sir? And Shula said, well, no. And the old guy said to Shula, well, sir, there's only 8 people in the movie theater. They don't actually start the movie till the 10th person shows up. So I was very excited when he walked in. I love that story. And just about every talk I've ever given, whether to a group of business leaders or high school graduation, I always tell that story. Because leadership, I believe, really always begins and ends with humility. And building authentic relationships with people always begins and ends with humility. And so when Meredith reads my bio about my New York Times bestselling books and all this blah, blah, blah about my career, it's deeply humbling because this is a picture of me. That's me 30 pounds ago, 30 years ago, class of 1987. And I looked normal, but I wasn't. I'm completely dyslexic and struggle with school and ADHD and ADD and have severe dyslexia and failed classes and struggled to get through high school. And my friends graduated back then, 1987, like magna cum laude and summa cum laude. And I graduated high school, thank God almighty cum laude. I just barely graduated school. I mean, literally at the bottom of my class. And I share this story because I want you to understand where this message comes from. We're going to learn about love in the workplace and building authentic relationships with your clients, that you build these lifelong relationships with your clients that are deep and meaningful. And I want you to know the story about where this all came from. It came from that high school kid that graduated at the bottom of his class. I remember going to my guidance counselor my senior year back in 1987. My parents were school teachers in the district. I was a good kid. I went to my guidance counselor. I told him I wanted to go to college. I told him I wanted to go to law school. My dream was to be an attorney one day. And he looked at my grades. I had a 1.9 GPA. He looked at my SAT score. I got a 620 on the SAT, which is the bottom 99 percentile in the country. He asked my class rank. I said, I don't know my class rank. He says, about 596 people in your class. You pretty much graduated at the bottom of your class. And so he gives me a brochure. Anyone from upstate New York in the audience? Anybody? Sir, what's BOCES? It's a vocational school in upstate New York. And that's where I was headed when I graduated high school, to be a plumber, electrician, or carpentry. There's nothing wrong with being a plumber or electrician or a carpenter. It wasn't my passion. But I didn't go to college. I listened to my guidance counselor, and that's where I was headed when I graduated high school back in 1987. An amazing thing happened to me that changed my life. This international musical leadership organization called Up With People came to my high school, my senior year in high school. Anyone ever heard of Up With People or seen an Up With People show? Those that are not shaking your hands or raising your hand, that are below the age of 50, Up With People is this international global leadership organization. It's a nonprofit, and it's all different colors of skins, religions, backgrounds, and they take young people, like all over the world, black and white, Jewish and Christian, and Muslims, and communists and capitalists, and all young people, and they took these young people on a tour of the world for a year. And they lived in host families. They did community service, like every day, volunteered in the community. And they did this 2-hour musical show called the Up With People show. And those that remember Up With People in the 80s, they did 4 halftime shows in the Super Bowl. I mean, Up With People was huge. And then 1988, Michael Jackson did the Super Bowl. We never got invited back after that. But Up With People was just tremendous organization. And the Up With People show came to my high school, my senior year in high school. My parents were school teachers. We didn't have a lot of money. I'd never been on an airplane before. I was 17 years old. I never really left New York before. I thought you needed a passport to go to New Jersey. Like, I didn't even know the world. And I go to this Up With People show, and I'm in the high school auditorium with my parents, and I see 150 young people, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 years old, and they're white, black, Asian, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, gay, straight, communist, capitalist, long-haired, tattoos, I mean, every walk of life. And they're all singing music, rock and roll music, about building relationships and changing the world and volunteering and making the world beautiful by building relationships with people that look and believe and pray different than you. It was an unbelievable show. And anyone who's ever seen that Up With People show knows how much it moves you. And so I was moved. And the show was over. And this gorgeous girl from Sweden, she must have been 22 years old, long blonde hair. I couldn't keep my eyes off her. She grabs the microphone, and she comes up to the stage and says, hey, if there's anyone in the audience between the ages of 18 and 25, when I take a year of your life and travel all over the world with Up With People, live with host families, do community service, and build relationships with people like us all over the world, come talk to me after the show. Well, the show was over. I didn't want to change the world or travel with other people. I just wanted to meet the hot girl from Sweden, right? So I got up on stage and I started talking to her. Hey, what kind of GPA? What kind of SAT score? What kind of class rank? Like, how to get up with people? And the Swedish girl didn't know an SAT, class rank, or all that stuff. She didn't care about that stuff. And she said words to me I never really heard before. We're looking for young men and women that have servants' hearts. I never heard that word, servants' hearts. They want to go change the world by building relationships with people that look and pray and believe different than you. So I followed her backstage at 17 years old, this kid. And I met a couple adults I interviewed. And a few weeks later, I get a letter in the mail that I was accepted to join Up With People. And so instead of going to BOCES in upstate New York, I got on the bus and I joined Up With People. And that 1 year turned into 9 years, traveling to 83 countries and living over 3,000 host families all over the world with Up With People. And that 17-year-old kid became the CEO and president of Up With People when I turned 35 years old. And I ran Up With People for 5 years, and it just changed my life. I mean, so everything in my message today, in my books, and everything I'm about, doesn't come from these fancy degrees from Harvard or Yale, although I respect those degrees. They come from traveling the world and meeting people and just learning to love and serve all people. And I've met some amazing people that taught me this great journey about how to build these authentic, genuine relationships. But even after traveling all over the world with Up With People, I had one dream that I wanted to be when I grew up, and that was to be an attorney. I used to love the law. Any lawyers and any attorneys in the audience? Come on, one, I got to tease you. Not one. Okay, I can have fun then. But I wanted to be an attorney, and so it was time to apply to law school. I went to college. I went to a school called East Carolina University. It took me 5.5 years to graduate with a 2.0 GPA because my grades were so bad and because of my dyslexia. And I knew I wasn't going to go to some prestigious law school, because law school you have to read, and law school's hard to get into, and my reading comprehension's so bad, so I had this strategy. I just had to find one law school that would accept me. And law school is hard to get into, so I researched. There's about 435 accredited law schools in North America. That's a lot of law schools. I just had to find one. And so I knew my grades were bad. It was a 2.0. I took the LSAT. I bombed it because I can't read very well. And so I had my sights set low, but I had this strategy to find how to get into school. So I researched, of the 435 accredited law schools, what are the bottom 37 schools, like the easiest 37 schools? And I applied to those 37 schools. And the reason why it was 37 schools is after working for Up With People for all those years, I only had about $4,000 or $5,000 to my life savings. And each application back then was about $100. So I could only afford to apply to 37 schools, because 37 times 100 is $3,700, and I needed $300 for postage to mail these applications all over. So I depleted my entire life savings. I applied to 37 of the easiest, the bottom 37 schools in the country. And here in my hands, that I've been carrying around the world since 1995, these are the original 37 rejection letters of the worst law schools in North America. Like, I didn't know there was 37 ways to play tells me to go take a hike. And I used to read all the 37 schools, and then I get these emails from people in the audience the next day, really upset with me, demanding that their alma mater is not the 37 worst law schools in the country. But, you know, it's amazing how to tell someone to go take a hike, like, I regret to inform you, I regret to inform you, I regret to inform you. I cannot offer you a position, unfortunately limited size, I'm genuinely sorry, unable to accept you, I'm sorry to inform you, it's with great regret. This was my favorite one from Mercer University. This was a difficult decision. Yeah, bullshit, difficult decision. Not a difficult decision. I can't read very well, right? I make fun of myself, but that was a real tough time in my life. And I laugh about it now, but when I was a kid, and I was applying to these law schools, and 37 of the easiest law schools, they all rejected me. That was the first time in my life that I dabbled with depression. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was actually working in Japan at the time. I just didn't know what plan B was. I spent my whole life at Up With People, and I thought I'd go to law school. And 37 of the easiest schools, they all rejected me. And so I was working and living in Japan, which I'll tell that story in a little bit. And so I decided to take a couple weeks off just to get my head clear. And I used to love scuba diving before I got married. I used to dive all over the world. So I decided to go to Bali, Indonesia to do some diving by myself. And I went to Bali, Indonesia. I'm in a dive boat, and I met this couple from Atlanta, Georgia, of all places. I'm in Bali, and I met this couple from Atlanta. And this woman was very involved in an organization called Rotary. Are there any Rotarians in the room? Oh, a few of you. Oh, wow, a lot of you. Fantastic. So all the Rotarians in this room know that there's a scholarship called the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. And I knew about Rotary because Up With People used to partner with Rotary. Rotary is, I think, one of the most incredible worldwide service organizations. And their whole motto is service above self, servant leadership, putting others before yourself. And this woman on the dive boat was telling me, Tommy, Rotary has a scholarship called the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. And with your travels with Up With People and working with Japan and your heart for people, you'd be a great candidate to win this scholarship.
I said, well, tell me more. Well, Rotary chooses one American every year to get a $50,000 postgraduate scholarship. You can get an MBA, business degree. And the prestige of the scholarship, Tommy, if you're accepted as a Rotary Scholar, you pretty much get an automatic acceptance to any business school that you want to attend. I didn't hear a word this lady was saying except automatic acceptance. Like, this is my chance of going to graduate school. They don't have to see my transcript. So I went back to Japan. I wrote away for the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship information, got the 7-page application mailed to me, and I spent the whole weekend filling out this application. And those that raised their hand that are Rotarians, I'm sure some of you have served on the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship Committee, nomination committee. Anyone ever serve on the committee? Actually chosen the scholar? No one. Okay. That's okay. I'll still tell the story. So I filled out the whole application, why I should be chosen as this $50,000 Rotary Ambassadorial Scholar. And I talk about my years traveling all over the world with people and how amazing that was to travel to 80 different countries and live in host families and meet people that are rich and poor and every color, skin, and every religion, really learning what the world's about. I talk about my parents. I grew up in upstate New York. My parents were Catholic. We wanted to have a big family. They had my sister, they had me, and they had 2 miscarriages. One of them died at birth, and they couldn't have any more children. So they decided to adopt a little girl from Korea. And that was new back then in the 70s, to adopt a girl from Korea. And I'll never forget going to JFK Airport with my parents. Never been to an airport before. And I remember being in the back seat saying, Mom, Dad, what are we doing? My parents said, we're going to the airport to pick up your new baby sister from Korea. I said, wow, is that how you make babies? My mom said, yes, you order them and you pick them up at the airport. I learned a little bit later that wasn't actually the case, how you make babies. But it was so cool going to the airport, and when that nurse walked off the plane and handed my parents a new baby that was 8 months old, that was my sister, how cool that was being white and growing up with a Korean sister. I talked about on the application, I went to college, East Carolina, I pledged a fraternity. One of my fraternity brothers pledged a fraternity this semester before and did something totally stupid in East Carolina. He dove headfirst into a river called the Tar River in Greenville, North Carolina, and he was paralyzed from his neck down. He lived across the hall from me in my dormitory when I was pledging my fraternity. He and I became friends, and soon to be became roommates. And so for 3.5 of my 5.5 years at East Carolina, my roommate was a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. So I'm pretty much poor. I couldn't get through my school, so I had 2 or 3, 4 jobs to get through school, dyslexic and failing classes and summer school. So I was struggling all through high school, feeling sorry for myself. But I look over to my roommate who was paralyzed from the neck down, and he had the most positive attitude towards life. So he really helped me with perspective. So I talk about this in the application. I spent the whole weekend filling out this $50,000 Rotary Ambassador Scholarship application, and the last question was on the application, what's your GPA? And it says in parentheses, 4.0 is required to apply for the scholarship. And my heart was broken because I didn't have a 4.0. I didn't have anything close to a 4.0, but I wrote what was required. I wrote 4.0. But I have to tell the truth, right? So I put a little asterisk next to the 4.0, and I clipped the application, and I wrote in very small handwriting, Dear Sir or Ma'am of the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship Committee, if you took my high school GPA and he added it to my college GPA, I had a 4.0, and I submitted the application. I didn't think I'd ever hear from these people ever again. An amazing thing happened. About a month later, I get a letter in the mail, and it wasn't one of these rejection letters. It was a letter from Rotary International in Evanston, Illinois, saying out of 800 of the top college graduates in North America, that I was one of 10 final candidates to interview for this $50,000 Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. I was so humbled. I couldn't believe that I was chosen. And I was broke because I spent all my money on these damn law school applications. I couldn't afford a plane ticket from Tokyo back to New York. So I borrowed $1,000 from my father. I drove from JFK Airport to a little town called Peekskill, New York, in upstate New York, where the interviews are being held for this $50,000 scholarship. So I'm getting back on a 15-hour flight. I'm jet lagged. I'm exhausted. I'm intimidated. I'm scared. I walk into a little Italian restaurant in Peekskill, New York, and 10 distinguished Rotarians in coat and tie are meeting the 10 candidates. And they went to all the 10 candidates and they said, we want you to wait in this bar area of this restaurant. And we're going to call each one of you for about 30 minutes into a room, and we're going to interview you, and then when you're done, you can leave. So I did the math. My last name is Spalding. I had about a 3.5-hour wait before my name got called. So I went into the banquet room, the little lounge area of the bar, and started introducing myself to the other 9 candidates. They were from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, some of the most prestigious schools in the country. And this was the most stuck-up group of people I've ever met. No one was talking to each other. Everyone was kind of spread around the lounge area, waiting for the name to get called. Well, I had about a 3.5-hour wait. So what did I do? I went up to the bar, and I sat down, and I ordered a Diet Coke. And I started talking to the only person at the bar, which was the bartender. Turns out he's Italian. My mom's 100% Italian. My dad's Irish. And so we grew up going to all these family reunions that are from Italy, and I just love my culture. And we started talking about Italy. And this guy was wonderful. Before you know it, he had yearbooks out and photo albums out, and he had his menu out, going over to grandma's meatballs, auntie's sauce, and we had this 3.5-hour conversation. And the bartender did me the biggest favor because I was so intimidated for the scholarship, and I was so nervous for the scholarship application interview that 3.5 hours went like this. Anyway, my name got called. I went into the banquet room, and I sat down in front of 10 very distinguished Rotarians, and I could tell right away that there was a few pissed-off Rotarians holding my transcript that didn't appreciate my 2 + 2 is 4 humor. And so one of the ladies basically said, "Hey, Tommy, you have a 2.0 from East Carolina where?" I mean, these are people from the top prestigious universities in the country with all 4.0s. But you made the track from Japan, so you got 30 minutes. Tell us why you should get the scholarship. And I talked about what it was like growing up in the resource room, growing up with dyslexia and ADHD and ADD. And they didn't know what to do with kids like me. So the resource room was filled with kids with Down syndrome and severe autism, and kids with football helmets, banging their head against the walls. I mean, all these kids with learning disabilities. Back then in public schools, they put us all in the room called the resource room. And my friends didn't call it the resource room. What did my friends call it? The retard room. And how would you like to be called a retard going through Halls High School? That was me. I hated that. And I talked about that I don't want to be labeled by my grades and my GPA or my schools I went to. I'm going to be judged by the people I love, the people I serve. And I just talked about my love for people. Anyway, here's how the day ends. I heard the story about 2 or 3 years after it happened. I wrote it in my book about 10 years ago. The Rotarians voted. They can only give one $50,000 scholarship. And it was a dead tie. 5 people in the committee voted for a girl who graduated magna cum laude, top of her class from Harvard University. And the other 5 people on the committee voted for me, Tommy Spaulding. He's not the smartest kid in the world, but he does live what Rotary is all about, service above self. This committee voted 3 different times, and every time they voted, no one changed their vote. 5 and 5, 5 and 5, 5 and 5. So finally the chairman looks at his watch and says, "I tell you what, we're exhausted. Let's go to the bar and get a drink, we'll talk about it." So these 10 Rotarians get up, they all walk over to the bar, and they all sit around the bar, and the bartender serves them all drinks. Before you know, it's like a Miller Lite commercial. Tastes great, less filling, Spaulding, Harvard, Spaulding, Harvard. These 10 Rotarians are debating, who should win the scholarship, and after about a 20-minute debate, a couple drinks, the chairman says, "Okay, one last vote. Who's going to change your vote? How many for the Harvard girl?" 5 people raise their hand. How many for Tommy Spaulding? 5 people raised their hand. Dead tie. And then the chairman looks up and says, "Who could be the tiebreaker?" "Hey, bartender, come over here." Bartender walks over there, and the chairman looks at the bartender and says, "You were in the room all day, weren't you?" Bartender says, "Yeah, this is my place." Chairman says, "Well, you must have met all the 10 final candidates. Who do you think should win the $50,000 Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship?" And here's what the bartender said. "I didn't meet any of the other 9 candidates. But that Tommy Spaulding kid came up to the bar, he sat down and just talked to me for 3.5 hours. What a genuine, nice kid." The bartender was a deciding vote, and I won the $50,000 scholarship. Thank you. Woo! So why do I share that story to very successful financial advisors around the country and the BAM Lauren Ward team? Why do I share that story? Is the moral of the story that tomorrow when you fly home, before you get home, make sure you stop by your local bar, get to know your local bartender. You have no idea how he and she are going to change your life. No. The moral of the story for me was that was my first time as a young adult that I realized the power of building authentic, genuine relationships with people. And I've spent the last 20 years of my life dedicated to teaching people, especially business leaders, how we need to shift our business from a transaction to building lifelong clients by building relationships with love and humility and service towards others. That bartender changed my life. He was the deciding vote. I went to business school. After business school, I got recruited by IBM, became CEO of Up with People, wrote books, and now I'm on stage speaking to millions of people around the world about leadership. If the bartender didn't cast that winning vote, I don't know what I've been doing. And I didn't want anything for them. And in life, we get so busy. When we build our business, we have these things called pipelines. We have to get to know these people. We're nice to these people. Not that we're mean to these people, but we treat these people differently than these people. And I believe that if you have a heart for all people and treat all people with this loving, genuine, authentic heart, you have no idea who's going to grow your business and change your life. That's the moral of the story. When I was a young kid, my father, he was a great guy. He was a school teacher. He was an English teacher. His only son, his only surviving son, was totally dyslexic and couldn't even read or write English. It must have been hard for him. He came by my bedside one night, and my father was a very quiet man, very shy man. He didn't really have these profound talks with me. But when he did spoke to me, I listened. And he comes to my bedside in, 7th or 8th grade, and he gives me this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Anyone ever read this book? Many people in this room. One of the best-selling books of all times. I think 20 or 30 million copies have been sold. Besides the Bible, I don't think any other book has ever sold more copies than Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's 70 years old, and it's still on the top 25 New York Times best-selling list, week after week after week. A book 70 years old. Amazing. So my father comes to my bedside and says to me, son, because I was struggling in school and academically and in the resource room, my friends were calling me retards, and I had to get left back one year and go to summer school, and it was really hard for me. So my said, son, you're not very athletically gifted, you're not very artistically gifted, and you're not very academically gifted. Thanks, Dad. And he says, but you're relational gifted. Even as a little boy, you were loving people. And I'm going to give you a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I know you can't read it, but I'm going to read it with you. And if you can do the teachings of Dale Carnegie, I think your relational skills will take you far in life. And he was right. We read this book cover to cover. And anyone ever read Dale Carnegie's book knows that he's got these 10 different tactics to win friends and influence people. Look people in the eye when you talk to them. Shake their hand firmly. Don't talk about yourself. Talk about others. Ask meaningful questions to other people. Don't talk about, things with conflict. All these tactics to help you win friends and influence people. And it helped me get through school. It helped me get through college and become president of my class and president of my fraternity and in sales. It just helped me become successful in life. And then I got married, and I became the CEO of Up with People, and I'm now leading a team of people, hundreds of people, and running this worldwide organization. And I learned 10 years ago that even though I love Dale Carnegie and his teachings are important, you can't build a lifelong employee, a loyal, dedicated employee with the 10 tactics of Dale Carnegie. It's not enough just to look people in the eye and shake people's hand, avoid conflict, and talk about their interests. To build deep, meaningful relationships, you have to go to another level. And so 10 years ago, I challenged the business world. I challenged Dale Carnegie, saying, we need more. We need to build what I call the 5 floors of relationships. And I wrote a book on it, and it became a bestseller, #1 bestseller, because people were starving to take these transactional relationships they had at work and to build these lifelong clients and lifelong relationships by building what I call 5th floor relationships. So every person in this room, whether you work for BAM or Lauren Ward, whether you're a financial advisor on staff or whatever your role is, every person in this room has personal and professional relationships. And my goal the next 48 minutes is that I want you to walk out these rooms, and I want you to go home tomorrow, and I never, ever want you to look at relationships ever the same. That's my goal. Because every person in this room has these relationships, and they all live on 5 floors. Every person in this room has relationships that live on 5 floors. The 1st floor, what I call transaction relationships. The Uber driver, the bank teller, the person that checked in the hotel, the person that served your breakfast, your waitress, the flight attendant. You have hundreds of 1st floor relationships everywhere we go in life, thousands of them. They say, how are you? You say fine, you don't mean you're fine, they don't mean how are you. It's just a transactional relationship. You know those ones, right? Then we move our relationships to the second floor. And second floor relationships are what I call NSW relationships. Anyone can guess what NSW stands for? News, sports, weather. That's right. News, sports, weather. It's small talk. News, sports, weather. How the Cardinals doing? How the Yankees doing? How's the weather? It's news, sports, weather. And there's nothing wrong with talking about the Cardinals. It's nothing wrong with talking about the Yankees or the weather or news, sports, weather. But it's small talk. And small talk is what you do when you first meet someone to kind of get acquainted. But I know people, I know financial advisors, I know real estate agents, I know salespeople that have second floor relationships with their clients. And let me tell you, you'll never build a lifelong client on the second floor. Small talk is not going to get you there. You need to move to at least to a third floor. And a third floor is when you start to get a little bit more vulnerable at who you are. So when people say, well, how are you? Instead of saying, oh, I'm fine. No, you're not fine. I got a 14-year-old daughter at home, right? Anyone have a 14-year-old daughter? I mean, they're tough. One minute she loves her father, next minute she wants to crucify me. Like, one minute she wants to hang out with me and pick her up from school, next minute I get in trouble for being seen in public with her, right? It's a tough time. So how you doing? Well, I'm struggling. That 14-year-old dad, it's tough. And you start being vulnerable. Yeah, I had a 14-year-old daughter too, and here's what I went through. But they come back when they're 24, 34, 44, but they eventually come back, right? And you start talking, you get vulnerable, and vulnerability is contagious, and you start sharing about yourself, and you don't look like a robot. You're kind of human, right? You move to a fourth floor relationship. That's when you start listening intently. Like every client that you have, do you know what they're going through? Do you know their wife's name, their husband's name, their kid's name, where they went to school, their anniversaries, that stuff? But also, do you know they might be going through divorce? Their kid might be on drugs. The little kid's got Down syndrome. It's their 50th wedding anniversary, or they're really struggling with depression. Or their business is struggling. Like, how well do you really know your clients? And when you know them really deeply, and they know that you want to know because you truly care, not just because you want to win their business. And the fourth floor, you want to win their hearts. Because when you win your clients' hearts, you win their business forever. And then you move to a fifth floor. If we can have 10 fifth floor clients, they're lifelong, truly authentic and genuine, humble. You do anything for the clients, and you're not just trying to win their business. You want to make sure that all are successful. You're investing in them and their entire family. And when you build these types of relationships, they change the business. They change your world. They change everything about you. By looking at relationships is not as transactional. By looking at relationships, not what I can get for you. By looking at relationships and not how can I get you on my pipeline list and win your business. By saying, how can I serve you? How could I serve you? And when you have that servant's heart, it's amazing what your business will do. This whole phenomenon is basically 15 years of my research. Hundreds of interviews and studying servant leadership and relationships. And my entire life's research is boiled down to one slide with 2 circles. It's pretty humbling. But this humbling slide can change your business, and it can change your life. Most people focus on ROI. Most companies, most financial advisors, it's all about return on investment. Most companies are paid and they're rewarded by their return on investment. We've heard that a million times in business school. It's the most important thing in business. When I wrote the book 10 years ago, I challenged corporate America saying that's wrong. It's not the most important thing. It's actually the second most important thing. The most important thing is ROR, which stands for what? Return on relationships. If you can build a business that truly is about building authentic, genuine relationships, your business will be incredibly successful. And I'm not saying anything you've never heard before. Of course, everyone here knows that building relationships and that you're in the relationship business. But we get busy. We get really busy. We bog down with our schedules and our lives, and we forget that ROR drives ROI. I want to tell a few stories, because I'm a storyteller, about how do you build fifth floor culture? How do you build fifth floor relationships? How do you demonstrate this in the workplace? Let me just tell you a few quick stories about this. This is Lindsay Burr. Lindsay Burr works for a bank in Denver, Colorado called Vector Bank. Anyone from Denver, Colorado? You know Vector Bank? Where do you bank, sir? Sorry? Not Vector Bank, but after the story, you're going to change banks, right? It's a great story. About 10 years ago, my first book came out. I did a whole tour. I was gone like 3 months. My wife calls me and said, Tommy, you know, your daughter, Caroline, who's now 14, she's turning 5 years old on Saturday. Are you coming home? I said, of course. I'm not going to miss my 5th birthday of my daughter. What are we doing for her birthday? My wife says, well, because we took her to Disney last year, and Caroline fell in love with horses, we're going to have a little cowgirl party in the backyard. Thought that was great. My wife, who's a school teacher, had a little cowgirl party for my daughter's 5th birthday. She's never ridden a horse. She's never seen horses. My daughter's never even been around horses, but this Disney movie made her fall in love with horses, and that's what my wife's going to have is a cowgirl party for my 5th birthday of my daughter. So I come home for the party on a Thursday. I go to Vectra Bank branch about 4:45 p.m. on a Thursday night on the way from the airport, on the way home to deposit my check. And I get to the bank. And I walk in, there's a long line before me, and a couple people after me. I get to the bank teller. I meet this woman, Lindsay Burr. I've seen her before, I never met her. I'm dating myself, a BlackBerry down, and I must have hit a button on the phone because my screensaver comes up, and Lindsay, Mrs. Burr, looks at my phone and sees a picture of my daughter on my screensaver. And she says, is that your daughter? I said, that's Caroline. She's turning 5 years old on Saturday. She's never ridden a horse. She's never been around horses, but she loves horses. And my wife is having a cowgirl party for her on Saturday morning at the back of her house. And I'm going on and on about Caroline, and she's going on and on about the transaction, and she sends me home with my deposit slip and a couple lollipops. Next morning, it's now Friday morning. I turn on my BlackBerry, turn on my computer, get a cup of coffee, start reading my morning email, and I see in my inbox I have an email from a woman named Lindsay Burr. I didn't know who Lindsay Burr was, but it said Vectra Bank, my bank next to it, so I clicked on it. And here's what this email said. Dear Mr. Spaulding, my name is Lindsay Burr. I met you yesterday at 4:45 p.m. when you came in to make a deposit at the Greenwood Village branch. I'm sorry that I couldn't talk to you further, but we wanted to close the doors at 5 o'clock and there's a long line of customers behind you. But I want you to know something, sir. I've been thinking about you all night. I thought that was really, really weird that my bank teller was sending me an email that she's been thinking about me all night. And then she says, you told me that you and your wife have a daughter, Caroline, that's turning 5 years old on Saturday. But yet she's never ridden a horse or seen a horse or been around horses, but she loves horses. I didn't get a chance to tell you this, Mrs. Spaulding, but I grew up in Colorado, and I own horses. And I have an idea for a surprise for your daughter's 5th birthday, that after her cowgirl party in your backyard on Saturday morning, that you could take your daughter horseback riding, and she could ride a horse for her very first time on her 5th birthday. So this morning when I got to the bank, I looked in the database to see where you and your wife live. Now I think this woman's like stalking me, right? And I see you live in Castle Pines, Colorado. So I called all the horse stables in the Castle Pines, Colorado. Turns out there's 6 of them. And 5 of these horse stables, you have to be 6 years old or older to ride a horse solo by yourself. But Cottonwood Riding Ranch in Littleton, Colorado, you could be 5 years old to ride a horse by yourself. Mr. Spaulding, I noticed that Cottonwood Riding Ranch had one last private lesson left on Saturday at 3 p.m. I hope it's okay, Mr. Spaulding, but I signed up your daughter, Caroline, for the 3 o'clock riding lesson. They're expecting your phone call this morning with a credit card to confirm the 3 o'clock lesson. What a great surprise for your daughter's 5th birthday that she can ride a horse for her first time. If I could be any further assistance, please let me know. Sincerely yours, Lindsay Burr, bank teller, Vectra Bank. That was nearly 10 years ago. I've told that story thousands of times. I've asked millions of people the same question I'm going to ask you right now. Have you ever received that kind of customer service from your bank teller? Can anyone beat that story? No one can. After millions of people, no one can beat that story. I didn't grow up with horses. I would never have taken my daughter horseback riding. And I was so impressed my bank teller signed me up for the 3 o'clock lesson. I took Caroline to that 3 o'clock lesson, and she rode a horse for her first time. And then horses became a huge part of her life. Loved them for years. That was what her thing was growing up with horses, riding them Western style. I never would have tapped into that by her father. But my bank teller found a way to tap into that. Do you think she's still my bank teller? Of course. I will never leave her, and I'll follow her to every bank she goes. A lifelong customer, because she tapped into my heart. And crazy story, last year, this terrible thing happened, but her niece was babysitting and watching her dog and babysitting their house, and the house caught on fire, killed the niece and ruined their house, and she was basically homeless with her husband with no house. And my wife and I, we teamed up with a bunch of people and helped her, and I mean, we're friends. And she's not a bank teller anymore. She's actually vice president of the bank now. She gets what relationships are all about. It's not about the transaction. And a humbling statement, the financial advisor business, the independent financial advisor business, you're never gonna win on price. You're never really gonna win on product because the products are very similar. You win on the relationship. The relationship is what separates you from everybody. You know this, but it's really living this to a level where you're actually reaching out to your clients and signing them up for a 3 o'clock riding lesson because that's what their daughter needs. That's fifth floor relationships. This is a picture of my friend Christian at a restaurant in Toronto. And I was backstage with one of the BAM friends and telling him about I'm a foodie and I love restaurants. And when I was in Toronto years ago with my son, who's now 11, I think Tate was probably 8 or 9, his first trip abroad playing hockey. And we're in Toronto. He's not feeling well. He's kind of got a fever. And we're starving. And we decided to go across the street to this restaurant, Trattoria Nervosa, Cafe Nervosa. It's in Toronto. Anyone ever been there, this restaurant? All right, everyone take this name of this restaurant down because when you hear about it, you're going to want to go next time you're in Toronto. Unbelievable story. We finally get into this restaurant. It was packed Italian. We love Italian food. My mom's Italian. We get to the restaurant. There's a wait. And we got in line. We finally get a table. We sit down. And by the time we sat down, my son was spent. He was exhausted. He wanted his mama. It was just one of those, when kids are sick, they want their mom. And I was having a miserable night. And the waitress comes up. And she must have been a mom because she just looked at my kid and just knew for the second that he had a fever. And said, hey, kid, you're not feeling well. And Tate's just like, feverish and just looking at her like big eyes. She goes, has your daddy given you Motrin yet? And I'm like, what's Motrin? Right? I was just like, felt like a total jerk. And she's like, well, it's something that can really help tame down the fever. I'll tell you what, there's a pharmacy across the street. I'll swing by and pick him up between tables and get you a bottle of Motrin. I was like, wow, I'm about to order spaghetti and meatballs, and my waitress is gonna go across the street to get me Motrin. Have you ever got that kind of service before at a restaurant? Well, she comes back a moment later and she says, I'm so sorry, but it's Sunday night and their pharmacy across the street is closed. But my manager is going to come up and talk to you any minute. A few minutes later, this guy comes up to me from Rome, Italy, 100% Italian, Christian Alfornay. And he comes to my table, explains again that the pharmacy across the street is closed, but he wanted me to know that he put his busboy in a taxi to go to a 24-hour pharmacy that's about 10 minutes away. And he says, in 20 minutes, you'll have your Motrin. I was just floored that the general manager of the restaurant is sending their busboy to pick up Motrin. 20 minutes later, before I know it, I had Motrin, and that's a wonder drug, because 5 minutes later, my son's feeling great. I feed him every night now, Motrin. This makes him feel great, right? Great meatballs, great food. Started talking to the waitress, asked if I could meet the general manager again, just thank him at the end of the night, wanted to pay him for the taxi service, I wanted to pay him for the Motrin. And what did he do? No payment. It's an honor to serve you. It's an honor to serve you. Well, I just couldn't believe it. So I got his name, sent him my books, he read my books, I invited him to a leadership conference, I became friends with him. My wife and I have been to Toronto 4 or 5 times since then, and we eat there every time. We met his wife. We had dinner outside of his restaurant, become friends with him. I built this relationship with him. And I've learned what he's done. Let me tell you about his little restaurant, Cafe Nervosa. I'm not sure any of you know about the restaurant business, but a restaurant that size with 103 seats is a pretty small, intimate restaurant. So with 103 seats in Canada, North America, United States, a good restaurant service sales, I mean, if you're doing pretty good, you're about $1 million. If you're crushing it, you can do $3 or $4 million on 103 seats. Last year, almost $12 million. They're the most profitable restaurant in Canada. 103 seats, $12 million. You do the math. It's impossible. You can't build that kind of business. Yes, you can, because he is not in the spaghetti meatballs business. He's in the relationships business. He's empowered his entire staff, from busboys to waitresses to waiters. You are there to serve your client. And if your client needs Motrin, you walk across the street and I'll give you $10 and buy Motrin. He's built this culture that people are waiting in lines for hours and hours for the spaghetti meatballs. or the relationship? Relationships matter. This next story is one of my favorites. Anyone know who Jody Rolland is? Jody was the managing partner for Merrill Lynch before the merger with Bank of America. She was known as probably the king leader that really orchestrated the merger between Merrill Lynch and Bank of America. She was at the time the senior most female leader in the financial services business in North America, a really sharp woman. She's now one of the senior leaders at JP Morgan Chase, based out of Dallas, Texas. I owe a lot of my career to Jody, because when 10 years ago my first book came out about building authentic relationships, she was the first senior executive from a company to really buy into my ROR mentality, to build a relationships business. And she had me come in to speak at the Merrill Lynch conference, and I probably spoke 8 or 9 times for a team. At the time, she had about 8,000 people, and she grew that to about 20,000 people, and they did the merger, and it just exploded. And I became good friends with her and her husband. And we're having dinner one night in Denver, Colorado, Jody and her husband, Rob, and my wife and I, Jill and I, and we're having dinner, and you know how marriages kind of go up and down? Do you know how marriages kind of go up and down? Oh, yeah. All right. I was kind of in a down spiral a little bit with my wife, and Jill and I were reading a book called Love and Respect, which is a great faith-based marriage book on really what marriage is about. Men want to be respected. At the end of the day, that's what we really want from our wives. And women want to be loved. At the end of the day, that's what we want with our husbands. They want to be loved. But a man's never going to really love his wife until he feels respected. And a wife is never going to love her husband unless he feels loved. And so there's this big old spiral that never happens. That's why we're on therapy and getting divorced, right? So marriage is hard. So I'm reading this book about love and respect, and I'm really getting a lot out of it. It's helping our marriage. And I started thinking about, maybe this applies to business as well. So I tested it. Jody, you got thousands of people that work under you. Run all of Merrill Lynch. Do you think your people love or respect you? Well, after a few glasses of wine, she said, well, you tell me. You coached my team. You met my team. What do you think? I said, I don't think you're going to like the answer. I said, I think your people respect you. Absolutely. You're probably one of the smartest financial advisor leaders in the country. But I don't think they love you. Oh, she got pissed, and she got really antsy and said, why? I said, Jody, with her permission, I'm sharing this story. I wrote this story in my book. What I'm about to share with you is unbelievable. I said, Jody, you have a story unlike anybody. It's an unbelievable story, what you've overcome to where you are leading one of the biggest financial institutions in the world. I've never heard you tell your story. I've been to the last 8 conferences. I've spoken at them. And when you talk on stage, you're talking about merger, you're talking about acquisitions, you're talking about ROI, you're talking about analytics. It's all from the head. You got to connect with your people here. For your people to love you and trust you, you got to be humble. You got to be real. You got to be human. I tell you what, you should tell your story next time you have your annual conference. This was about 4.5 years ago. I wrote this story in my last book. It was a beautiful story. She took on a bet with me. And I went to that conference at the Bellagio Hotel years ago in the back of the room when I watched Jody get up on stage in front of 8,000 of her people. And she talked about growing up in Minnesota, population 300 or 400 people. And she talked about having a father that was an alcoholic that she never met. And she asked the audience, anyone have an alcoholic father that you never met? A lot of hands raised. I was raised by my mom, she said. My mom had 2 or 3 jobs to get through school and to get through life. And I loved my mother. When I was young, she told the audience that I used to sleep with my mom because I had nightmares. When I was 4, when I was 5, when I was 6, when I was 7. And one day when I was 8 years old, I was sleeping with my mom and I woke up to go to school. I went to wake up my mom and she didn't wake up. Massive heart attack and died. I'm in the back of the room. I could see and hear a pin drop in the room. And I can see how this culture of people respecting Jody for being the genius that she is financially start to love her because she's human. Growing up with no parents after 8 years old and what it took to get through school, get to community college, her first job. Then she talked about being pregnant. Amazing story. Anyone try to get pregnant ever have a miscarriage, she said? Hundreds of people raised their hand. Your wife got a miscarriage, you got a miscarriage? My wife had a miscarriage. I know how painful they are. Jody says to the audience, I didn't just have 1 miscarriage or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. We had 8 miscarriages before Keaton was born. It was an unbelievable testament to Jody sharing a story of herself. And she said to the people, her 8,000 Merrill Lynchers, if we really want to win our customers' business, we have to learn their story. And they're not going to share their story with us until we share ours. And Jody taught me that night the power of sharing your story. And when you share your story with your customers, with your people, they'll have safety to share theirs, and then you build a bond, that you build a lifelong customer. And Merrill Lynch merged with Bank of America. They had this whole thing. Everyone has a story, had a whole campaign that Jody drove in, that it's all about relationships, and you should really charge our financial advisors to learn people's story. And so tomorrow when you get back to your office, I'm not saying, get a staff meeting and tell your entire staff all your affairs and tax evasions in your life. It's not what I'm saying. Everyone has a personal story you've overcome. I was ashamed for 20 years about these law school applications. Never told anybody. I was ashamed that I graduated bottom of my class in high school. I was ashamed to tell people I was in the resource room. I never told people. Matter of fact, when my book hit the #1 bestseller list 10 years ago, I had friends from high school going, I had no idea that you were in the resource room. Like, man, you hit it. I was ashamed of that stuff. But now I talk about it because it makes me more human. And people want to follow people that are human. And so learn from Jody. The power of being vulnerable is not weak. It's a powerful thing. A relationship audit is something I think that can change your business. It's something I've been teaching for 10 years, and it's really simple. And when you hear it, you're going to say, that's a great idea. What's going to happen is you're going to go on a plane tomorrow, and you got your wife, you got your kids, you got your husbands, you got 1,000 things, and you're going to forget to do it. But it's an easy thing. And I wrote the book 10 years ago. If you can do the relationship audit and do it well, you'll double your business in 4 years. You'll double your business in 4 years if you can do this well. And I wrote a book that's coming out next year of organizations and salespeople from all over the world that are doing the relationship audit and what happens when you do it. And what this is, it's simple. Get a piece of paper on the plane tomorrow, or at the office tomorrow, or tonight, and write down on a blank piece of paper 1 through 10. And think about who are 10 of the most important clients that you have. Who are 10 of the most important customers, the most important employees? Who are 10 of the most important people in your business? Most of the people in this room are independent financial advisors. You have 10 people. You might have 30 people, but who are 10 of the most important clients that you have? Write their first name and write their last name down. And with the BAM Lauren Word people, write down 10 of the most important clients you have, or teammates that you have, or people in your team. Who are 10 people that you work with every day supporting these amazing advisors? Who are 10 people that are important in your job every day? Write their names down. And then look at their first name and last name, 1 through 10. The most important piece of paper, the lifeblood of your organization. And then ask yourself humbly, what level relationship do I have with these 10 people? Do I have a level 1 transaction relationship? Do I have a small talk relationship? Every time I get together, we have beers, we're talking about the sports, we're talking about the weather, we're talking about news. Do I have a third floor relationship? Do they know what's in my heart? Am I vulnerable to them? Do I have a fourth floor relationship? Do I really know their story? Not just their financial performance or their portfolio, but do I really know their story? Do I have a fifth floor relationship? Lifelong customers. I know everything about them. They know everything about them. Their son was in Peter Pan last week. I was at the show. I'm at their wedding. I'm at their funerals. I'm doing life with them. You want to grow your business? Take that list and take all those names and try to get them to a third or fourth or fifth floor relationship. And then go back to your teams if you have other financial advisors that work for you. Tell them to write down 10 people. And all of a sudden, everyone in your organization is doing a relationship audit, and you commit for a year. Every day, you're pouring into those people. Right? You're going to get them Motrin when their kid is sick. You're signing up their daughter for a 3 o'clock writing lesson. You pour, you pour, you pour. Nothing to do with financial advisor. Nothing to do with wealth advisor. It's all about pouring into them as a whole person. You will have unbelievable success if you do this. But it's really hard because it takes time to do that. I want to tell a story about these two people. I wrote a book called The Heart-Led Leader, which is the last book I wrote, and it was such an amazing, humbling experience writing a book about servant leadership. Because at the end of the day, there's really 2 types of people in the whole world. There's 2 types of financial advisors in the whole world. There's self-serving people, self-serving advisors, and there's servant advisors, servant people, servant wives, servant husbands, right? Two types of people. You're either self-serving or you're serving. And no one's in this room is going to raise their hand and say, I'm a self-serving advisor. No one's going to raise their hand. No one. But after 10 years of research in my book, The Heart-Led Leader, almost 83% of the workforce are self-serving leaders. It doesn't make you mean or bad people. You just innately think about yourself first. And then when your needs are met, you think about your customers, your clients, your family. But to be a servant leader, to truly serve others before yourself is really, really hard. And so the last 10 years, I've written about it, I've talked about it, I teach about it, and I'm basically a full-time student and teacher of servant leadership and how when you have a servant's heart, how you can really change your business. But it's really hard to be a servant leader. It's not just because you're a nice person. Every day you have to pour into people before you pour into yourself. And where I learned the foundation of this was from this man, Anthony DeQuani. He wasn't a financial advisor. He wasn't an attorney. He wasn't wealthy. He came on a boat from Italy. And he was born and raised there and came over and moved to White Plains, New York. And he married the same woman and loved the same woman for 57 years. That was his success. Loved and married the same woman for 57 years. They owned Helen and Anthony's hairdresser studio in White Plains, New York on Main Street. My grandmother would wash the hair of women for 40 years, and my grandfather would cut and style women's hair. And above Helen and Anthony's hairdresser studio was a 2-bedroom apartment where they raised 4 daughters, one of them being my mother, Diane. And so when I was a little boy, I watched my grandparents hold hands and talk and laugh, work together side by side. They were always dancing in the kitchen at Christmas time. I mean, I am convinced they had an active sex life well into their late 80s, right? Convinced. I just hope those genes get passed down to me, right? But they were in love. They modeled love. They modeled unconditional love. And after 50 years of marriage, my grandmother had a massive stroke, and she spent the rest of her life in a nursing home. And I learned a lot about strokes through my grandmother's experience, because when a stroke is so severe, Medicaid and Medicare does not pay for the rehabilitation of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathologists, because it's a waste of money, they think, when the stroke is so severe. And so they told my grandfather that there would be no physical therapy, no occupational therapy, but she'll spend her life at this nursing home, but you can go visit her. So at 7 o'clock every morning, my grandfather visited my grandmother. The doors would open at 7 o'clock. He was always the first one outside, 10 minutes to 7. Doors open at 7. He'd race as fast as he could to Helen's room. Terribly loved her, threw his arms around her, and he read books. He became her doctor, her physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech pathologist. He did everything he could, massage therapy, speech pathology. He had this zest and this desire to help his wife. And my grandmother eventually walked and talked 3 years later. It's an amazing love story. The nursing home general manager, I wrote this story in my last book, was so amazed, so deeply touched by my grandfather's devotion. The nursing home general manager, true story, gave my grandfather his own key to let him in and out of the nursing home. How much he loved his wife. My grandfather eventually passed away. He had a brain tumor. And we hired hospice to get him to heaven. Do you all know about hospice? It's a great organization that helps people die at their own home. So we all go to White Plains. We all go there to say goodbye to my grandfather. And in Italy, you call them Papa. And that's how you say grandfather. So we're all by his bedside. His 4 daughters, his 14 grandkids, his great-grandkids were all by his bedside. Tell him, Anthony, tell him, Papa, how much we love him. I love you, Papa. I love you, Anthony. And with his last words before he dies, he looks up, and this is what he says. Stop telling me you love me. Don't tell me you love me. Show me you love me. And he closes his eyes and goes to heaven. And for years, I wondered what the hell my grandfather meant by that. Like, who says that on your deathbed? Don't tell me you love me, show me, and then goes to heaven? Like, what the heck? I know exactly what he meant now. When I wrote the book, The Heart-Led Leader, 4 years ago, I was trying to really understand what is servant leadership? What is it when you live a life when you truly put others before yourself? Your family, your clients, your customers, your employees, when you truly do. And it's what my grandfather said on his deathbed. Servant leaders don't tell people what they're going to do for them. Well, let me tell you what I'm going to do for you. They just shut up, and everything is about their actions. Show me that you love me. I believe love has a place in the workplace. You never have to tell your clients you love them. You have to show your clients that you love them through your actions. And that's what really servant leadership is all about. I had the 2 circles in my first book, so I improved my research to my second book to 2 other circles, right? But this is my research. 8 years we did this second book, and we researched the most successful organizations. We researched the most successful salespeople all over the world, thousands of data, and we found the organizations that had the unbelievable success. We had this correlation of who has lifelong clients. You know what a lifelong client is? That would never leave you through price or product change. They have your business forever. Like my bank teller. I'll never leave Lindsay, now my vice president of the bank. A lifelong client, how do you build that? And we found this correlation. Love and results are 2 sides of the same coin. When I went to Random House years ago and said, I want to write a book about love in the workplace, they rejected it. I told the grandfather story and said, not the kind of love you say, not the I love you, client, I love you, client. You show your love through your actions. And we have a correlation that if you can build a servant's culture where you're truly serving your culture with love through actions, that you'll have more results than ever before. That love and results are 2 sides of the same coin. I mean, we're brainwashed for years. We're supposed to take our heads to work and leave our hearts where? Where? Home. For years we've been told that. We're strategic, we're analytical, we're thinkers. Financial advisors have to be smart. They have to understand data. I mean, it's all this, it's all the head. And that's what this 18-inch ruler here is for. The greatest distance that any financial advisor, that any leader, that any person can make is the journey from the head to the heart. That's 18 inches. From your head to your heart is 18 inches. To go to work and lead with this, that's how you build a culture of love, of lifelong clients, 5th floor relationships. That's when you really take business to the next level, but you have to truly live that. If you go to Barnes & Noble, my books are in the business section. I'm a business author, I'm a business speaker, a leadership author, leadership speaker, blah, blah, blah. It's where the books have to go. But I cringe when people think that I'm just a business speaker, because the message of heart-led leadership, the message of building authentic relationships, the message of changing your business and changing the world is not just in the business section of Barnes & Noble. It's in every section. And I'm going to share a story, and I hope this story changes your heart forever, because the 300 people in this room are about to go home tomorrow to like 38 to 48 different states throughout the country. I mean, all over the country. That you can have this story in your heart forever, because this story changed my life. People ask me, what's the one story that changed who you are? And it's this woman here, Mrs. Tanaka from Japan. Changed my life, really taught me what relationships are all about. They're not just about building a business to make money. It's really about changing the world. My first job out of college, I taught English in Japan. And I know that sounds crazy because someone that can't read or write English got a job teaching English. But the 1996 Winter Olympics were in Nagano, Japan. The 1996 Summer Olympics were where? Atlanta, Georgia. That's right. The Winter Olympics were in Nagano, Japan. And the 1972 Sapporo Olympics were in Japan as well. And it was a failure. Does anyone know why it was a failure? The 1972 Sapporo, the most lowest attended Olympics in history. And it was a nightmare. And the reason why is what? Anyone know? Sorry? No, it's close. That's a good thing, Munich. No, but the reason why that the Sapporo Olympics 1972 was a dismal disaster is that it was an island in Hokkaido, far away, and 98 to 99% of Japanese people outside of Tokyo or Osaka or Yokohama don't speak English. So no one spoke English in Sapporo. And so they were hosting this international event, and no one knew where to go because all the volunteers couldn't even speak the language. So when the IOC awarded Nagano the Olympics in 1996, they said, we want you to have some Americans or some Australians or New Zealanders or Canadians that speak the English Western tongue to go and live in the village for 2 years before the Olympics to help train, to help teach English to Nagano Olympics athletes and the Olympic volunteers in the IOC of Japan. Well, I heard about this job. I said, cool, I can live in Japan for 2 years and just teach English, conversational English. The bathrooms to the right, the bathrooms to the left. Welcome to Japan. Easy, I got this. So I moved to Kisa Fukushima Machi, Japan, back in 1994, 2 years before the Olympics. I just spent years traveling the world with people. We went all over the world, but it was easy. We had tour guides, we had translators, we had 150 young people, staff. It was an operation of safety because it was an international organization. Now I'm living in Kisa Fukushima Machi with 8,000 villagers in the Alps of Japan where the downhill skiing was happening in Nagano, Japan, and no one spoke English. And I was the first American to live in this village. No gaijins, no foreigners. And it was hard. I mean, the first few weeks of living in Kisa Fukushima Machi, I wanted to quit. I mean, nothing in English, all in kanji, katakana, hiragana. Anybody ever been to Japan before? You know how hard it is. In the bigger cities, there's a lot of English. But in the smaller towns called Inaka, which means the countryside, I mean, there's no English at all. I mean, everything is in kanji and katakana. Couldn't go to haircut, couldn't go shopping, couldn't go to the post office. I mean, it was just a really tough time walking around with my translator. It was hard. I'd like to just give you an example of how hard it was. First week that I was there, I moved into my apartment. My apartment was about the size of this top platform of this stage. And besides being dyslexic and ADHD and ADD, I'm also OCD, right? So try being married to me. So I had to have things really neat and clean. And so my apartment was totally dirty. There was cobwebs everywhere. It was like nasty. And so I'm freaking out that I got to get this place clean. So I was trying to get downtown to Kisa Fukushima looking for a super Walmart or something where I can buy some scrubbing pads and some cleaning detergent. I get to these little village, and there's these little tiny village shops, not one big store. I'm looking for the detergent, you know, the scrubbing pads and the cleaning detergent. And thank God the Japanese guy is just bald. It's the Japanese Ajax guy. Like the cleaning detergent is just the bald Japanese guy in a bottle. So I bought the cleaning detergent. And I'm looking for scrubbing pads. Aisle after aisle after aisle. I can't find it. I find a box, a big picture of scrubbing pads. Bought the box with the Ajax, went over to the checkout counter. And the lady at the checkout counter is looking at me like I'm crazy. And I realize I must be the first American to ever even shop in her village store. And she's looking at me like I'm nuts. So I go home, I get a big bucket of hot water, I pour the Ajax in there, and I open the scrubbing pads and realize why the lady's looking at me like I'm crazy. I didn't buy scrubbing pads. I bought a box of maxi pads, right? I was so embarrassed, I didn't want to return them. I scrubbed my whole apartment with those maxi pads. It's amazing the amount of moisture these things can absorb. Windex, scrubbing, floors, like women that are going through menopause. Do not throw those things out. They are household cleaning products, right? I literally have an hour of stand-up comedy of just the first 3 weeks at Kisa Fukushima Machi. I made one political, one social faux pas a day. I was always making things wrong because it's a whole different culture. And it was just, I wanted to quit. It was the first job I wanted to quit. And then an angel comes to my door, and her name is Mrs. Tanaka, this woman on the slide here. She was old enough to be my Japanese mother, and she's wearing a beautiful kimono, and she's standing in the front door with this box, and the box was filled with baked bread. I could smell the goodness of it. And she says in English, "Hello, my name is Mrs. Tanaka. My husband and I, Mr. Tanaka, own the local bakery called Pullman Bakery down the street." I knew exactly that bakery, because when I would walk to work, I'd pass by that bakery every morning, line of people outdoors. But I never went in because I can't speak the language. I didn't know how to order. So I just walked by. And here's the owner at my doorstep with a box of baked goods. And she says, "I am one of the volunteers for the Olympics, also teaching English, and I want to practice my English. And I came here to ask you a proposition." I couldn't believe she knew the word proposition. I invited her to my house. We get into my house, and we sit down, and she says to me, "I want to improve my English. Will you tutor me? In exchange, I'll tutor you, Japanese, and I'll also take you shopping and teach you how to buy scrubbing pads." The lady at the store is telling everyone there's a crazy American Windex thing with maxi pads, right? So we had a giggle about it, and I started going to her village, once a week to tutor in Japanese. And then she'd come to my house and tutor me in the Japanese, and I tutor her in English. And then she went to take me to get a haircut, and took me to the bank, and opened a deposit, and took me to the post office, and teach me how to buy stamps, and takes me to the grocery store. I mean, she really helped me figure out how to live in here. And I started tutoring her once a week, then twice a week. Before you know it, I'm going there almost every day. I met her kids. There were 2 of them in high school, 1 in junior high, and their home was right behind the bakery, and I started hanging out with her all the time. She literally became like my Japanese mother. This went on for months. We had this arrangement, and it was just working perfectly. But I noticed something that wasn't right. Mr. Tanaka, the husband, never looked at me, never acknowledged me. Every time I came over to say hello to Mrs. Tanaka, he would see me, and then he would just walk right out. Every time I had dinner or lunch or breakfast, he never joined us, ever. Every time I came over to the bakery and said hello, picked up some goods, never served me. He always walked out. And those that have been to Japan, why do you think he did that? And he was embarrassed. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He was embarrassed. He couldn't speak English. Japan's got this incredible, weird culture, credible culture, where their face, their pride, their ego is so transparent, where if they don't know the language, they don't want to be in a position where they're embarrassed because they couldn't speak the language, so they excuse themselves so they don't have to be in an awkward situation. I think this was the case, because this went on for months. But finally I went to Mrs. Tanaka, and I said to her, why does your husband always walk out of the room every time I come over? Why does your husband never join us for dinner or lunch? How come he never looks at me or say hello? Why? And I thought she'd give me the answer this gentleman just gave. Instead, Mrs. Tanaka looks at me with tears in her eyes and says, my husband hates you. Really? What did I do? My husband just not only hates you, but he hates your country. He hates the United States of America. Well, why does he hate our country so much? And then Mrs. Tanaka told the story of the 52-year-old husband that 50 years ago, when he was only 2, he was born and raised in a village called Hiroshima, or Hiroshima as we say in our textbooks. And your country bombed that village, and over 100,000 people were killed that day, including his family. And he was born into an orphanage and learned to hate your country and blames your country for taking his family away. And so there's nothing you can do to change his heart. He hates you and your country, and there's nothing you can do. But I like you, Tommy, and you can come over and we can tutor each other and you can play with me and my kids, but don't talk to my husband. He wants nothing to do with you. So I went home that night to my little apartment thinking. And what Up With People taught me, what Rotary taught me, service above self, building a world where you build relationships with people that look and pray and believe differently than you, the old-fashioned way, the hard work. Like my grandfather said, don't tell me you love me, don't tell me you're going to do for me, just show me you love me through your actions. I made a commitment that night that I was going to do whatever it took to win Mr. Tanaka's trust. I was going to do whatever it took. I failed to mention this to you early in the story, but Kisa Fukushima is in the Alps of Japan, the deep Alps. It's kind of like the Montana, Colorado of America, where the Alps were, the Rocky Mountains are, but in Japan. So it snowed like crazy. That's where the Winter Olympics were. And so when it snowed, Mr. Tanaka would be out there, 5:30 in the morning, shoveling the driveway of Pullman Bakery so his customers can park the car and walk into the bakery. And every morning at 5:30 in the morning, he'd have his shovel in the driveway when it snowed. I'd grab a shovel, head down to Pullman Bakery every time it snowed. I shovel the driveway, shovel this thing. Did it ever, he never looked at me, never talked to me, shoveling side by side. Every time it snowed. Never welcomed me inside the house. Never offered me hot tea or hot chocolate. Never said hello, ever. Helped him paint his house, tutor his kids, clean his... I was over there all the time serving his family, helping his wife, helping his kids. In the springtime, they pick rice in Japan. When you pick rice, you get down low in the backyard, we're picking rice. I did so many hours of chores and service to their family. He never looked at me, ever acknowledged me, and never joined us for a meal. Ever. This went on for nearly a year. Don't tell me you love me. Show me you love me. A year later, he comes to the table for dinner for the first time. I couldn't believe it. My heart is beating. He's sitting next to me at the dinner table. And halfway through the meal, he turns around and he gets a big bottle of Japanese sake and he puts it in the middle of the table. And by then, I've lived in this village for about a year and 3 months, and I knew what that meant. Japan's culture is totally different than America. In America, when you go to someone's home for dinner and someone else cooks the meal, invites you home, what do you bring to their house? A bottle of what? Right, and the person that hosts the home gets the wine, say welcome. Sometimes they serve the wine, but the guest is always served by the host in America. I'll pour you a glass of wine. What do you want to drink? That's our mentality, our hospitality, our culture. In Japan, it's totally opposite. The guest doesn't bring a bottle of wine. The host serves the first bottle of wine, and the guest of the home pours the host the first glass out of respect to thank them for serving the dinner. So when he took out the bottle of sake, I knew that was my cue to pick up that bottle of sake. And my hands were nearly shaking. And I opened it up and I poured him a glass of sake. And Mr. Tanaka picked up that glass and he held it right up to me for the first time looking at him. And he smiled and said, "Kanpai." And then he picked up the bottle of sake and he poured me a glass. And I picked up that glass and I looked him right up and smiled as generous as I could and said, "Cheers." And I picked up the bottle and served him a glass of sake, and he picked up a bottle and served me a glass, and I picked up a bottle and served him a glass, and he picked up a bottle. It's amazing what alcohol can do to forge international relationships, right? I mean, we polished off that bottle of sake, and we became whiskey drinkers. And we would drink whiskey every night when I was over there for dinner, and we became friends. He never really spoke English the remaining 7 months that I lived there, and I never really spoke Japanese. But he knew I loved him by how I treated his wife and his children. And we built this incredible friendship just by drinking whiskey and sake together. And thanks to the bartender from upstate New York, I got a full scholarship to get a master's degree in Australia. So I was moving to Australia to go to the University of Bond outside Brisbane, Australia, to get a full scholarship thanks to the bartender. So I packed my bags up and I'm going to the train station, saying goodbye to this great village I lived in for nearly 2 years. I'm walking through the train station saying goodbye to everybody. In Japan, they have this beautiful culture where they don't shake hands in public. They certainly don't hug in public. They bow in public. I mean, a husband comes home from work with his wife and says, "Hi, how are you?" I mean, I don't know how they make children over there because they're always like bowing. They're not even touching each other. I mean, I come home, I can't get my hands off my wife, right? But I'm just bowing everybody. And the more respect you have for someone in Japan, the deeper you bow, the more respect. Small bow if you don't respect, deep bow when you respect. So I'm going through the train station, bowing, saying goodbye to everybody, working my way up the top of the platform of the train station to get on the train. They call the trains Shinkansen trains, and that train was going to Tokyo to fly me to Australia. And the corner of my eye before I got on the train, just waving goodbye to everyone that I lived in this village for 2 years, I could see Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka park their car with their kids and walking through the train parking lot, walking to the train station and walking up the stairs. Mr. Tanaka leading with his wife and his kids. And Mr. Tanaka walks right up to me in public, in front of his wife, in front of his children, in front of all his community down at the bottom of the platform, his arms wide open, and he comes right up to me and he hugs me and holds me in his arms. And I'm looking at Mr. Tanaka and he's crying. And I'm hugging him in public, which never happens. And he's crying and I'm crying and he leans into my ear and he says words to me that changed my life. He says, "Tommy-san, I love you. You are my American son. You are my American son." So I hugged him again. I gave Mrs. Tanaka a big hug. I knuckled and high-fived those kids in high school and junior high. I grabbed my suitcase. I went on the train. I get on the Shinkansen train and I get to my chair and I roll down the window and the train is pulling away. And I peek my head outside and I'm watching Mr. Tanaka kind of hold hands and wave goodbye. And I realized then, it's not about the 37 law school rejections or the 1.9 GPA I had in high school or the 610 I had in the SAT or the 2.0 I had in college or every standardized test I took I failed. It's about this, the heart. That I lived a life of serving and loving others, and because I did, it changed me. And that story, it changed my life. And every single person in this room, whether you're a financial advisor or you work for BAM and Lauren Lindsay, if you live a life where you're serving other people, every single person in the room may have a Mr. Tanaka Tana in your life, might have a Tanaka in your life, and you live a life of service, and you love and serve people, and you serve your clients in a way that they know your heart. Your business changes, your community changes, your family changes. but it really starts with your heart. And I know we're having a great time at this conference, but when you go home, I really want everyone to really think about their legacy, what their clients really think of you. Do an audit, write their names down. How can I serve my people better? How can I serve my wife better, my husband better, my kids better, my employees better? How can I live a life of service? When you live this way and you build what I call the 5 floors of relationships, your life changes, your business changes. This BAM Lauren Ward community changes. Just the friendships that you have year after year that you're building, it changes when you change your heart. And it starts today, and it starts now. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of the conference. God bless. Thank you. Thanks so much.